everybody, I'm Irene Susi. I'm a registered dietitian and I'm working with the Early Head Start program here in Delaware. And today we're going to be making a meal for a family of 4, consumer friendly, budget friendly, likely under $10 a meal. And it's going to be nutrient dense. We're going to focus on all of the food groups. Gone through some recipes here, and come along with me as we start the preparation. As with any time that we're going to make a meal or do anything with food, we have to make sure that food sanitation is really key. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull my hair back. Easy as can be. We don't like it when we go out to eat and we find hair in our food, nor do we want to do that to our family, right? So I'm just going to make sure my hair is tied up pretty much all together, and then I'm going to wash my hands. I'm also going to remove on my wrists anything that might touch the food or kind of cross-contaminate the food. So I'm going to take off my bracelets. So I'm sure we've all heard that we should be doing this for 20 seconds. Sing the ABCs, happy birthday a couple times through. Make sure we're scrubbing. Going to get in between my fingers. Make sure I'm getting into my nails too. A lot of times that's where the germs like to hide. I'm going to go up on my arms a little bit. Last thing I want to do is to make any of my family members ill because of foodborne illness. That can certainly be prevented. I kind of like to do until I feel the water warm up. And then I'm not going to touch the handle that I already used when my hands were dirty. I'm going to go ahead and grab a disposable towel. So right now what I'm doing, so one of the recipes calls for evaporated milk, and it doesn't call for much. So instead of spending my money and purchasing an entire can of evaporated milk that I likely would not use the rest of, I went ahead and just used the skim milk in my refrigerator. So I'm just going to boil it and whisk it here. And I just have a little bit longer to go. And then I'll be ready to use it in my recipe. So I started with just about 3 cups, and now I'm down to about 1.5 cups, and that's just right. So I'm looking at the recipes that I'm going to use tonight, and I'm going to think about the timing of food prep. So I'm going to start with the fruit skewers with yogurt dip. Now that's going to be my dessert. As you can see, it's going to have fruit and yogurt, which would be our dairy group. Okay, so I'm looking at the recipe for the fruit skewers with yogurt dip. And so there's 2 parts to it, right? The fruit and then the yogurt dip. So let's go ahead down and look at the dip. So I'm going to need 1 cup of strawberries, rinsed, stems removed, and cut in half. Okay, so one thing to keep in mind is when we're cutting fresh produce or things that we're going to eat fresh, right? We're going to want to use a different cutting board than those that would be made for raw meats, raw chicken, raw poultry. So I like these little, real light, inexpensive, cheap cutting boards. One is green for produce, right? And one is red for my meats. And that way I can avoid cross-contamination. So I've got my fresh strawberries right from the farm. Do any of you go to farmers markets? I would really, really suggest it. You can get the real fresh local produce if that's available to you. The second ingredient that we will need for the dip would be the fat-free plain yogurt. So I just buy the store brand. It's always less expensive. I need some vanilla, and I need some honey. So here I go. I have everything I need to make the dip. And then for the actual fruit, I'm going to need strawberries again. This recipe calls for pineapple, so this is a great time to buy fresh produce. This stuff is as inexpensive as you're going to get it. I'm certainly not going to make fresh fruit skewers in the dead of winter because produce will be that much more expensive. That's a really important tip here. So we're lucky enough to be making this in July, so I'm going to take advantage of all that fresh produce that I can right now. So I'm going to use the pineapple, I'm going to use the strawberries. Next on the list are blackberries, and I was actually just able to buy these beautiful blackberries. Again, nice and in season, not very expensive at all, but try to buy those in winter and you're going to be paying a pretty penny. So I was able to get these, and they're nice and big and pretty, and you can imagine already, and we'll see it as we proceed. We're going to have the yellow from the pineapple, the red from the strawberries, and the deep, deep blue, black from the blackberries. The recipe also calls for a tangerine or clementine. I did not get one, but I do have these beautiful peaches I just picked up, so I may decide to put some peaches in there instead to pick up on that orange color. Okay, so first I'm going to get started with the dip. So 1 cup of strawberries. I'm going to double check my measurements here. Okay, so 1 cup of strawberries. I need a 1/4 cup of fat-free plain yogurt. A teaspoon of vanilla. Let's put that away in the fridge. So let's go ahead and put some of this beautiful fruit on these skewers. I will mention that these may be too sharp for a lot of children, so I think about using just those little coffee sticks, right? Those little coffee stirrers. They would be just as good, and they would be strong enough to get through the fruit themselves. But I have these skewers, and I'm going to go ahead and get started. Okay, now we have everything skewered up. The dip is done and in the fridge. Let's put this in the fridge and get ready for the next step. Okay, so the next step is preparing our main course here. So we have the turkey meatballs with the whole wheat spaghetti and the chunky tomato sauce. I've decided to leave the Parmesan green beans for the last preparation step because that will only take a few minutes, and I don't want the green beans to get soggy or kind of lose their color. So that's a real quick and easy thing to leave for the very end. So looking at the turkey meatballs, whole wheat spaghetti, and tomato sauce, so I know I'm going to have to boil the pasta. I know I'm going to have to prepare the ground beef, or the ground turkey in this case, and I want to make the tomato sauce. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the tomato sauce. I know that I'm going to need the olive oil, the garlic, the roasted red peppers, which was a little bit of a splurge, but it's really going to add something to this recipe. The diced tomatoes, and it calls for 1 can of low sodium tomato juice. In our household, we do like the V8 juice, so I went ahead and bought the whole bottle, and that's actually going to save me some money when you buy in bulk, right? You buy larger quantities, you save more money. But I do know that I'm going to have to dice up the roasted peppers, so let's get started with that now. We just need to drain and dice this whole jar of roasted red peppers. all ready to go. Okay, and just a reminder, whenever you're working with cans, always be sure to rinse the top of the container before you open it. You never want to cross-contaminate anything. That's good. So I'm putting 2 teaspoons of olive oil in the pan. Cooking it up. 1 teaspoon of garlic. I do cheat and use the pre-minced garlic. But you could use 1 clove. Okay, I need about 6 ounces of tomato juice. So I'm measuring that out here. Enough to have a basil plant out back. Really a little bit less expensive way to do this because I know our family, we eat a lot of basil in the summer. And so instead of buying basil repeatedly throughout the summer, I'll just simply buy a plant early on, repot it, and then you eat off of it all summer long. And the basil's ready to go. Good. And the red peppers are sizzling, so we are ready to add the other ingredients. Juice. Fresh basil. Fresh ground pepper. So it calls for about 1/4 teaspoon, so I'm going to give it several twists here. We're going to bring this to a boil and then let it simmer for about 10 minutes. That gives us enough time to get started on the next step. Okay, so now we're getting ready for the turkey meatballs and whole wheat spaghetti. So first step is to preheat the oven to 400. And I'm going to get my water boiling for my pasta. And while that's happening, I'm going to get ready to build these meatballs. As I mentioned before, I always like to use my red cutting board when I'm working with raw meat. And this is a 16-ounce container of ground turkey. And I only need 6 ounces. So this is definitely going to give me something to make for another meal this week. Maybe turkey meatloaf, maybe turkey burgers. Always really careful not to cross-contaminate when I'm working with raw meat. So the next ingredient I need for the turkey meatballs is 1/4 cup whole wheat breadcrumbs. So instead of buying an entire container of whole wheat breadcrumbs, what I'm going to do is use the end pieces of a loaf of whole wheat bread that my family typically does not eat the end pieces. I don't know why, they're still edible. But I'm going to use those end pieces and I'm going to toast those up and I'm going to make my own whole wheat breadcrumbs right out of my loaf of bread. We're boiling here. Well, I can cut this down to a simmer now. Oh, it smells good. Now, one thing to keep in mind with the tomato sauce is if chunky isn't really the preference of your people, your family, they don't like to see tomatoes in their tomato sauce, you can easily puree this. Remember the evaporated milk? Here's where it comes into play. So, I need 2 tablespoons.
Okay, good.
1 tablespoon of Parmesan cheese. Now for half a tablespoon of parsley. Ooh, it looks like the water's boiling. Okay, ready for the spaghetti. All right, so I need 8 ounces of dry whole wheat spaghetti. My 1 box container here is a pound, which is 16 ounces, so I need about half of this. Making sure the pasta is fully covered by the water. Okay. And we'll let that boil. Oh, our breadcrumbs are done. Just a couple pieces of toast here. Okay, we have our toast. Throw that in here. Now we're ready to make our meatballs. The recipe says to use a non-stick baking sheet. I used my regular sheet that I have, but I did spray it with a little bit of canola oil to help it to be a non-stick surface. I have this in several sizes. Pasta's done. Recipe says to bake meatballs for 10 minutes to an internal temperature of 165 degrees. So now we're ready for the green beans. Okay, I'm going to start with a tablespoon of olive oil. And a teaspoon of garlic. I'm going to cook that until the garlic is soft, but not brown. Garlic is cooking up nicely. Starting to smell good. I'm going to go ahead and add the onion. I'm going to cook that for about 5 minutes. Okay, there's my turkey meatballs. Let me see how they're doing. It's been about 10 minutes, but I always want to make sure that they're done. You never want to eat raw ground beef. Okay, my next step is going to be to add the green beans and the chicken broth. So I need 1 cup of chicken broth and a 16-ounce bag of frozen green beans. So this is a 16-ounce bag of frozen green beans. And 1 cup of chicken broth. Okay, let's pull it all together. I'm going to check the temperature of the meatballs just to make sure they're done. Yes, they are. Okay, the My Plate is a great guide for portioning out our meal today. So I'm going to go with the grains as the pasta. So I know I want a little bit more than a quarter of my plate to be pasta. Now you could measure this to be about a cup and a half. And I know I want more than a quarter of my plate to be vegetables. I always like to emphasize the vegetables. So we're going to have the vegetables come in the form of both the homemade tomato sauce, the pasta sauce, and the green beans. We have plenty of sauce here. I have a little bit more than a quarter of my plate left for my green beans. I am going to sprinkle a little bit of Parmesan cheese on top. Don't forget about the dessert. Let me get a glass of water. And there you have it. A meal using ChooseMyPlate.gov, built with all of the food groups, nutrient dense, budget friendly for less than $10 for a family of 4. Oops, sorry. It was really good. Enjoy.